Hi, welcome back to the workshop for the next instalment of the precision base build, and in this episode we're going to get back on with the neck. Now this neck blank has been sat inside in the warm for about a week now, and I'm glad to say that there's been no more movement on it, so it is still a little bit bent, but it's not got any worse, it's not got any better, so I'm happy to kind of move ahead with this now. So the next job is to take the remaining bit of wood that we had from the neck blank and dimension this up and get it ready for becoming the fretboard. Okay, so this bit of timber is obviously a lot bigger than we need for the fretboard. So the first thing I'm going to do is get it down to an appropriate width and then trim it somewhere near the length. Luckily, we've still got one very square and straight edge on this side, so I can use that to reference all my markings off. And with that trimmed off, I'm just going to true up this edge with a hand plane. Okay, so that's roughly to size now. So the next thing I need to do is mark for my thickness and then get this back onto the bandsaw again and rip it down its length. Now this should be 6mm thick, but I'm going to make it 8, just so I've got a little bit of extra material to play with if I do run into issues down the line with that neck bow. Okay, so if any of you were ever wondering what the limits of my little bandsaw were, I think we just found it. That was quite tough going there, and I could feel as I was cutting that the timber was moving on me. This is the offcut, and you can see that's stuck on a bow. However, the bit I want seems to be straight enough, so that's great. This is a little bit over thickness still, so I need to get a plane onto this now and get it all flushed off and leveled down to where I want it. So I suppose the next step with this is to kind of get it onto the neck template, figure out exactly where it needs to be, mark the nut slot, and from there we can then lay out for the fret slots. Now normally I would use a pre-cut fret slotting template on a jig to cut the fret slots. I don't actually have one for a 34-inch scale length, so I'm going to have to do this the old-fashioned way of measuring them with a rule and cutting them that way. Okay, with the blank roughed out, the next thing I'm going to do is set it up to mark for the fret slots. And as I said earlier, I'm going to be doing this with a rule, not with any kind of jig or anything. So it's really important that this is measured accurately. And one way I'm going to achieve that is by making sure that everything is held securely. So the first thing I've done is I've stuck this down to the bench with super glue and masking tape. I've marked where my nut wants to be, which is leaving me plenty of material on the other side of that, so that I can make the transition from the headstock into the neck really nice. The next thing I need to do is to mark in a centre line. So I've set my little square, make sure I get the right side, for 35mm. At this stage it doesn't really matter if it's dead centre, as long as it's running parallel to my reference edge, which is this back edge. So I'm just going to mark in 35mm at each end and mark that line in. So next up I'm going to take this steel rule, which I know is good and accurate, and I'm just going to attach it in the same manner to the fretboard. And that's marked now really securely. I'm going to use the end of the rule and I'm going to mark that as my knot line, and then I'll work from that. Okay, and all I'm going to do is, I've got a fret calculator set up on my laptop, which you might just be able to see, which gives me the positions for all the frets measured from the knot. It also gives me the gaps, which I can use to kind of double check, but I'm going to be working everything from the knot, so I've got consistency there. Okay, so first thing is just marking my knot line. And then I'm literally just going to work my way down the fretboard, marking as I go. Now I've got measurements that are down to 2 decimal points in millimetre. So the first measurement is 48.47 mil. Now there's no way on earth that I'm going to be able to eyeball 0.47 of a millimetre. It's roughly half a mil. So that's what I'm going to go for. Obviously, measuring down to this level of accuracy, I'm not going to be able to do it even with my glasses on. So I'm going to break out the big eyes and get right in close and make sure I mark them up as best as I can. Okay, so I've marked all those out. I've been over it again off camera and kind of double checked them. So they're all where they need to be now. So I'm going to get this ruler off. Tape off it. And then I'm simply going to square a line across for each fret mark and for the nut with a square and a striking knife, and get those ready to have the fret slots cut in. Okay, so that's been checked again and we're looking good. So it's basically a case of getting this into the fret slotting jig now, and very carefully cutting these in, making sure that we're following the marks that we've just put in. Okay, so time to get the radius on this fretboard. And all I've done is I've fastened the fretboard down to the bench in the time-honoured fashion, and I've put 2 guides that are absolutely dead parallel to each other either side of it. That will keep my block nice and square to the job. And then I've just got this monster sanding block to put the radius on with. This is a 9.5 inch radius. Just got some 60 grit paper on, so that's really rough. So hopefully won't take too long, but I do imagine it's going to take a little bit of time to get this rubbed in. Wow, okay, so that's pretty much now down to radius. There's a little bit just up here where I haven't quite got yet. There's still a little bit of the centre line on, so that would indicate there's probably a little bit of a dip there. But I'm going to leave this for now in terms of radiusing, because we all know the neck's a little bit bent, so I think I'm probably going to have to do a little bit more work on this to get it absolutely spot on. So for the time being, I'm going to call that radiused. That is quite some hard work. That's taken me about 40 minutes to sand that in. But it's looking good, happy with it. The next thing I'm going to have to do is just go back into these fret slots, because we've lost the fret slots on the edges where we've took most of the waste out. And to do that, I'm just going to get my fret slotting saw and I'm going to set the stop up to the depth of the tang on the frets I'm going to be using and just go through these and resaw them again. Okay, so that's all the fret slots kind of opened back out again, filled into where they need to be, and I've also measured and just cut the back edge of the nut slot as well. I'm not going to do anything else with that for the time being, but at least I know it's cut and it's square. So the next thing I'm going to do is reinstate the centre line right the way around the fretboard, so front and back, and then I'm going to mark the nut line on the back of the neck as well. And once we've got those two marks in position, we'll be able to position it onto the neck blank properly. But before we do any of that, I'm going to put the position markers on the top of the fretboard in. Okay, so that's the fretboard all marked out now for the markers. This is one of my points of kind of maximum paranoia when I'm building guitars. I always kind of hate to think that I might get them in the wrong place. So this has been like quadruple checked now, so it is all in the right place. And I'm just going to put some simple 6mm dot markers in. Now these are actually dot markers that I've made. I can't see the point in spending money on something this simple. So what I use is this stuff. It's Fimo. It's modelling clay basically, but it's kind of like a plasticky stuff. This is a bit old and dry now, but if you kind of work it with your fingers, it gets back into a usable state. And what I do, you can probably see there's a lot of crap on this one still. I've got this little piece of aluminium, and what I do is I stuff the compound into these holes, pack it down with a drill bit until it's nice and solid, and that goes in the oven for half an hour. And when it comes out, you've got little rods of black plastic material. They can then be sawn down into little dot markers. I think that cost me maybe £2 years and years ago. God knows how many markers I've got out of it. So that's another little tip for you there. So first thing is to just pop a little mark on all of these centre points with an awl. And get those to the drill press and put a 6mm recess in. Okay, and with that done, it's just a matter of dropping a little bit of super glue into the hole. Positioning your marker and just giving it a tap in. Just rinse and repeat all the way down the line. I'll just give them a quick blast of accelerator. Make sure it's all properly cured. And then I'm just going to give that a very quick rub over with the sanding block to get those back down. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the next job is positioning the fretboard onto the neck and making sure that it is in exactly the right position. And to aid us with that, we've got centre line on the neck blank and on the fretboard, and we've got a mark on the neck blank for the nut position, which of course we've now got on the fingerboard, and I've transferred all of those marks all the way around. So this is a little bit fiddly, but once it's done we don't have to do it again. So it's just really a case of getting everything roughly in position. And clamping it. And from there, just adjusting it with a couple of light taps from the mallet, just to get it all lining up. And that is absolutely spot on now. And with that positioned, what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to take a 2mm drill bit, and I'm going to drill through a couple of the fret slots. Through the board and into the neck, and I'm just going to insert a bit of cocktail stick through that hole, and I'm going to do one down the other end of the fingerboard. And now we've got some positive location, so we can take this fingerboard on and off pretty much as we like and still get it back into the same place. So with that done, we can now mark this out for rough trimming. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rough trim it on the bandsaw before I glue it on. It's going to be relatively close, but then once it's glued on in position, I will then run it round the router table just to flush up all the way around. Okay, get it off and get it to the bandsaw. Okay, so there we have it. Rough trimmed. There's still, as you can see, a bit to take off. I think the only thing we can really do now is bite the bullet and get this glued together. Okay, so I've installed the truss rod and I've just put a little piece of masking tape over the top of it to keep any of the glue out when we put this together. I've also turned the truss rod round in the neck, so it's going to be adjusted from the heel. So I've added a little hole so I can get the Allen wrench through. I'm actually going to use the bench as a core when I glue this up, hoping that that will help straighten the neck out. But if it doesn't, I'm pretty sure that the truss rod will straighten it for us. Okay, let's get some glue on this. Okay, so I've resisted the urge all night to unclamp this sooner than I really should. So it's been in overnight now. Glue should be good and dry. So let's get it unclamped and see how we've done. Okay, so I had a sneaking suspicion that gluing this on the bench wouldn't really cure the bow, but it was always worth a try. There is still a little bit of a bow in there. I don't think it's any worse than it was, which is a good thing, but I've just been over it with my digital vernier and we've actually got probably about 1 millimetre along most of this neck more than we need. So I've got a little bit of scope there to even it out a bit more. Need to really bear in mind that it's only the top face of the fretboard that we need flat. The back of the neck, we can make that flat when we carve it. So I haven't got an issue with that so much. So that's great. That means we can do a little bit of remedial work on the fretboard now that everything's glued in place. But of course, the other trick up our sleeve is that we've got a truss rod in this now, and it's a two-way truss rod, so hopefully we should be able to get this a bit straighter on that. So let's give it a bash. Okay, with a bit of a tweak on the truss rod, I've actually managed to flatten the top of the neck quite substantially. There is a little bit of a dip, but I have got a little bit of extra material on this neck, so I can hopefully get that flattened out with the sanding block. But before I do that, I'm just going to get this onto the router table and flush trim it. Okay, so that's been flush trimmed now, and it's actually made for a really nice join along that neck. I'm really happy with that. There's a really good match with the grain too, so once that's sprayed up, it's going to look fantastic, which is good. So what I'm going to do now is just get the big sanding block back on the job again and even out any inconsistencies that are left on this board. I've got roughly 1 millimetre along most of its length that I can play with. So this neck is pretty straight now on the fretboard, at least. There's a tiny little bit of a drop away at this end of the neck, but it's not so significant that it's going to be a problem. What I normally do when I level my frets anyway is kind of from the 12th fret onwards, I'll put a little bit of fall away on the frets just to give you that extra little bit of clearance up the top end. So I'm pretty sure that's going to be absolutely fine. So with that done, we're kind of finished for this stage of the neck. The last remaining job I've got to do is to put the side dots on, but I am aware that this video is getting quite long now, so I'm going to carry on and get these side dots in off camera. I feel like it's been a bit of an epic journey to get this neck to the stage we're at, but I do feel that I've got something that I can use now, so it has been worthwhile. I'm going to be back in a couple of days' time when we'll start to look to get some frets into the neck and continue to move things forward. So as always, if you've enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I shall see you in a few days' time with the next episode. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.